Hey everyone, I'm Eric.
And I'm Justin.
We're co-founders of Sonic Bloom, and we'll be covering game audio and game industry topics today. We're going to keep it laid back and fun, and hopefully weekly. So far, we've been pretty good about that, and we're going to try to keep that up.
Let's cover our first topic of today for the news.
Woo!
Oh, you want me to go? Or do you want to go?
Yeah. You started up.
All right. Here's a big one. I think it's probably the biggest news this week. The SEC and the European Union both approved Microsoft's buyout of Bethesda. So now Bethesda is officially part of Microsoft Studios. So the real questions here is, yeah, it's great news and all. And it helps, fill out Microsoft's war chest of game IPs that they have exclusive rights to. I think I'll cover the statement that Microsoft released, which was a little bit ambiguous, and they had to clarify as for whatever reason their marketing team has to keep doing. It's like they make these statements that are vague, and then everybody's like, "What does this mean?" Then suddenly they have like a PR person going like, "Let's clarify this. Let's get another interview to sort of clarify things." But basically, their statement was, welcoming Bethesda to the team of Microsoft Studios, and they use clever wording here, which was Bethesda's games will be best enjoyed or best experienced on Xbox and on the Xbox platforms, Xbox Live, Xbox or Game Pass, and the consoles themselves. But best experience seems to leave this wide open door for what it actually means.
Did that include Windows in there right up?
Yeah, it includes Windows, because I think Microsoft's official stance is any game that is coming to Xbox is that their internal studios are doing will make it to both to make it to Windows as well as Xbox. So like Microsoft Flight Sim is going to be released on Xbox soon, or if it hasn't already. I didn't keep track of that game, but I believe it's going to be released soon. They had to follow up, and their follow-up didn't make it any better, because basically said, no, there's going to be games that are exclusive, but it's not. They weren't like all games will be exclusive. So I think this is where I think we can talk about it and be like, what does Microsoft actually mean, and what is their strategy here? Eric, do you have any insights that you think you can
bring to bear? I think I have questions that I can bring to bear. We've been talking a lot about this, through the videos we've done and through the previous streams, where it's pretty clear that Microsoft's their future is in the Game Pass service, games as a service. They want to be the platform that you use to just stream content or get access to games. So we were talking about the platform stuff for Microsoft and the Bethesda acquisition, which my point is that when they say best enjoyed on Xbox, that can basically, we talked about last week that they've been doing trials of getting Game Pass running through browser. So anything with a browser that's at least theoretically WebGL or some basic set of web tech capable can stream Game Pass, and that means that you could play it on like a PlayStation browser or whatever if it's high featured enough. And there's more I think we're going to talk about later in this episode that might relate to that. But exclusives may mean exclusive to Microsoft services, but it may still be playable on whatever hardware you want. So that's why it gets, maybe that's their way of being cute and trying to like not under promise the future that they see at the same time as, because they're trying to basically message for a world of today without giving away their cards for tomorrow. So they're kind of being squirrely about it. That's my guess. Do you have any other thoughts about that?
I do. I don't disagree with what you're saying. The question I have is whether or not they would do that so quickly. So basically, right, is does it make sense to make everything Xbox Game Pass? What kind of physical releases are they going to be doing, if at all? I think the obvious thing is there'll be physical releases on Windows and Xbox. It will be otherwise playable on Xbox Game Pass and xCloud or whatever it's being combined as on whatever devices that will run it. But I also think Microsoft, at least for the meantime, would be kind of foolish to make games like Skyrim and Fallout exclusive to Xbox, period. Because basically they're established IPs. They're IPs that have been enjoyed on both consoles. And Microsoft also has experience with this with Minecraft. Like, they didn't make it Windows only. They made Minecraft available on everything because that's the way that they drove profit on that. And they, got their multi-billion-dollar investment back. So my general feeling is this. I think those physical releases on PlayStation for the games that used to be, or that have always been cross-platform, but Bethesda has a handful of new IPs coming, and I think those are likely to just be Xbox platform exclusive.
Yeah. I would agree. I think they would, from an investment standpoint, they sank a ton of money into that purchase, and in order to recoup some of that, it's too early in the Xbox Series' lifespan to really make the money back on that. And I mean, it's going to be a long haul before they fully recoup their costs and turn a profit on it. But it's, I guess, in the short term, it makes sense to keep the energy going on the IP that exists already. If people are used to playing it on the PlayStation, let them play it on the PlayStation. If they're used to playing it on their Xbox, play it on the Xbox. Make as many sales as you can, and then once Game Pass is up and running at full steam the way they want it to, Steam, not that Steam, but once it's running it at its full scale, whatever they want it to be, then you start saying, okay, now we're going to bring it to just Game Pass. For the next generation, there's not going to be a next generation of hardware, maybe a set-top box that we guarantee streaming latencies or blah, blah, blah. But and have a controller that works with it, no questions asked. But it's going to be a Game Pass-based service. All the games are going to just be delivered through Game Pass. That's to me, the right way to do it is to, like, once you have Game Pass at that scale, then you say, okay, everybody come to the fold, right? It's what Disney did with their IP and Netflix and other streaming services. Once they had theirs up and running, they started bringing them back into the fold and not allowing other people to do it.
Yeah, it's
Meanwhile, they're still making money on the deals and the IP.
It's sort of like, why lose out on short-term cash when you could make money now? And Fallout and Skyrim are too big to, like, just ignore, whatever it is, 7 million, 11 million copies, because that's money in the bank that they can use to fund other projects. And we know Bethesda has some new IPs, and I'm sure Microsoft will be hopefully shepherding some new development under better terms for Bethesda that will allow them to generate new IPs that are exciting. I'm blanking on the name of the game, but there's like that space faring one that's sort of like Outer Worlds, except not. So I don't remember the name of it.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm totally blanking on it right now, but yeah, it's they announced it at E3 last year, I believe. I think it was E3 last year. They showed it in a press conference. So they have that coming up, and that I could totally see that being 100% Xbox exclusive. If you want to play it, you have to do that. But yeah, there's too much of a following behind Fallout. There's too much of a following behind the Elder Scrolls games that lopping off the PlayStation user base is a bad business.
And honestly, to be fair, it would be nice to see some Microsoft exclusives show up on the Xbox, just like there are already tons on Sony and Nintendo stuff. It's like, if you can have those dedicated engineers and you have, like, okay, we're going to have this on one hardware set. Well, technically it's two because of Microsoft and their S and SX stuff, but regardless, they have one architecture to deal with. They can hyper optimize and do some really cool stuff. And I think that Sony's done a great job with that. Nintendo clearly does that with, like, all of their games. But we haven't really had much to see on that side from Microsoft, at least in the one generation, other than like the Gears series and maybe a couple Halos.
Right. Right.
So it would be nice to see a little bit more variety of games over there, and to build excitement for the player base.
I mean, at the very least, what they can do is they can make games like, the entire Bethesda catalog, which includes games like Doom, like we said, the Elder Scrolls games, Fallout, Wolfenstein, Dishonored, Prey, and there's more that I know I'm forgetting, but basically, they can make those like streaming exclusive. Like that won't be available on Stadia. That won't be available on whatever else, but you can get it free right now if you have an Xbox Live account or an Xbox Game Pass account that gives you that stable of games like today. And I think they're doing a rollout. Like there was, I don't know if it was announced, but basically like Fallout 4 was going to be available on Game Pass almost immediately. So stuff like that.
It's not surprising.
Yeah,
they lost a few big hitters with the last crop, and they're it's not like it works like Netflix, right? They work out time to deals with having these things on, which as a player, it's kind of frustrating, but I get it.
Sure. I mean, at some point, I think Microsoft's going to have it in the bag, and people will have to put their stuff on their platform if you want to play it. Or the worst case scenario is going to turn like the streaming wars, and we all have 3 or 4 different streaming accounts in order to get the full breadth of games available. But
and then we'll have cable come back, and they'll say like, "Do you want all of the channels? we can give you one package that has all of the streaming services and all the game services
just for $69.99 per month." And you're like, "Oh, I guess we're just back where we started."
Yeah, right. Exactly. Also, we've added ads.
Yeah, I know exactly. Hulu.
Yeah, they never gave us on that.
All right. Actually, there's one extra point. I know we're kind of drawing this one out, but it's probably the most important topic that we got this week. But Bethesda historically, Bethesda's setup, at least before, was that they had a set of investors that were funding their games. And around Fallout 4 timeframe, they picked up a pretty big investor that gave them, hundreds of millions of dollars to develop the next set of games. And some people credit that investor and the pressure on them for the sort of, the direction of Fallout 76 and, the lack of polish on it. Not that Bethesda or like the Elder Scrolls or Fallout games are very polished in the first place, at least not to release, but people credit like investor pressures for the like early release of that game that was not ready. The thing that's interesting, I think, about this is that Microsoft, I think, has learned a lot of lessons since the Xbox came out and what it means to actually support their internal studios. With an obvious turn that has happened with the Xbox, with like, for instance, Halo going like, even though we're ready to launch, we want to launch Halo with the Xbox, we're willing to push it back and make sure that the game is just not garbage, because they've taken a lot of flack for the games in the Xbox One generation. So if they came out the door with another, mediocre Halo game, I think it would mean some pretty bad things for their studio acquisitions, and I think how it would be publicly perceived. But them taking the step back, I think taking cues from Mojang, who's, I guess, influencing them and how they're handling their internal studios. This might actually mean really good things for Bethesda and their ability to put more polish into their games and maybe develop under less pressure. That's just a thought there. Anything to add, Eric?
Yeah. No, I think that's definitely a reasonable thing to be considering.
So coming right up, we're going to be covering Xbox Edge browser and their support for Stadia and Geforce Now, which is actually another weird one. Basically, the recap on this is that the Edge browser, which is shared between Windows and Xbox, is mostly just a full-featured browser. And that means that browser-based apps are supported, and that includes Geforce Now, which is a game streaming service, as a Stadia. And the weird part is Microsoft's pushing obviously Game Pass, and now they're allowing these sort of competing streaming services on their platform. It's great for people who might have these services because basically they can play those games on their Xbox now. But what does that mean for Microsoft? Like, how's Microsoft strategizing around this?
I think this may be Microsoft. There's a really weird angle here where it's like, okay, Xbox One, Microsoft came out and said, we're going to be the entertainment center of your entire, or the hub of your entire entertainment center, right? They're going to have TV, they're going to have live TV or cable TV that went into the back of your Xbox, and you could have like TV picture in picture along with your game, and it would all be done directly. You'd have like TV guide style thing to be able to pick what channel you wanted to watch and just flip through stuff using effectively like a cable box. So it's going to do multiple things. And we're also going to support Skype because they had, back when the Xbox One originally launched, you had to have the Connect 2. So you had all these services and stuff built in. And of course, if you're going to do that today, everyone has like an Apple TV or a Roku or a Chromecast, as well as a smart TV that's probably capable of all the apps anyway. So why not just open it up and just make sure that people are using the Xbox rather than those other devices? And at that point, if people are going to be streaming Stadia to their TV anyway, keep them in the Xbox. That's more opportunity to upsell to Game Pass. And at some point they're probably hoping to convert people over there. I think it's a smart move, and also, I think Justin, you can speak to this because we chatted briefly about this morning. But they also would seem a little bit hypocritical if they ever said like, "Hey, can we? Hey, Sony, you want to put Game Pass up there? We'd like to get a Game Pass app on PlayStation."
Yeah, and I think that might actually be more of the strategy here. Like, they could block access to those pretty easy on Xbox. I have a feeling they won't. Like, Microsoft needs to clean up their. I think have been playing this long game of like the uphill battle. They're the underdog, right? Like, minus the Xbox 360, which more or less was neck and neck sales wise with the PlayStation 3. The Xbox One was a pretty bad stumble for them. And, they have a public image that they need to recover from that generation. And it can't be like the sort of, hubris that they had going into the Xbox One, where they're like, hey, we can do, digital, digital copyright stuff where, if you don't have the disc, you won't be able to play it, and we have to check the internet every time you have a disc in the game or in your system to make sure that you own it, and all this other stuff that people rightfully railed on them hard against. And then they bought a bunch of studios, and those studios didn't really produce anything during the last generation, so they are eating humble pie, and it's deserved, really. Because they did exactly what Sony did during the PS3, which was like coming to it thinking that they were the best ever, and then ended up having to, scramble for the remainder of the generation, going like, actually, we're not as awesome as we thought, and actually we're there for the gamers. So I think this strategy really is, if the long term is Game Pass and having Game Pass on multiple platforms, including competing consoles, then the real thing that they're going to need to do is not come off as hypocrites. They can't go out the gate swinging, being like, you have to support Game Pass on PlayStation, but at the same time we're blocking streaming web apps on our browser. It would just be a bad look for them, and they would probably rightfully get raked for that. Next up, we'll be talking about Germany and their proposal of limitations on loot boxes. This should be a good deal shorter. Eric, are you familiar enough with it to talk and summarize?
No, I'm familiar enough with it to talk about it, but not to summarize.
Basically, there's a coalition in Germany that's suggesting that loot boxes are gambling and are preying on young people, and they're not wrong.
Absolutely not wrong.
And honestly, they already have some laws in there, but basically, it's game developers seem to be quite shameless at times with how they implement these things, and they're gambling machines.
Yes.
Sometimes they make them better or worse, but basically, I think Germany's kind of fed up with it. They're proposing laws that would impact all game developers who want to sell within Germany and possibly throughout the EU.
To be fair, I kind of have started to think about the game industry in as multiple segments. It's big enough these days to be able to do that. And it's in loot box and the free-to-play games that make a ton of money by providing free-to-play stuff and then just letting you buy visuals or whatever. Or especially by gating gameplay. Like, you can only play for 15 minutes before you need to cool down, or you can pay for a gem that lets you unlock it. These are those are a class of game that, just on a personal level, I steer clear of for a number of reasons. And one is because it's not so much of a game as it is like basically running around in a casino and pulling a lever. Yeah, I guess that's my editorial piece on that. I think it's totally righteous that they're doing it, because I also don't think they're the first country to start regulating and putting restrictions and rules down on loot boxes.
Yeah, I mean, the U.S. has threatened it. It's just that it's business regulation, and therefore there's not a broad coalition of people that support it, and I don't think it's gained much traction in the U.S. But basically, yeah, I mean, outside of free to play, where you may use similar mechanics to generate revenues, I think the real not criminal, but the real thing that like people are kind of upset about, and while there might be more support for this, is games like FIFA, which have loot box functionality in it. You pay $70 to get a game, maybe less, maybe they make it free or whatever it is, but basically you'll pay $70 for a game, and they justify it as going, well, it's software as a service, right? We're providing a game service, which is going to have, updating, whatever, games that, and challenges that come up throughout the year. And you can get this game pass that makes it so that you can engage in all these things. And part of that, we're going to give you some tokens that you can use on our loot box system. But anybody can buy these. These are E for everyone games, or whatever the PEGI rating is. And it means children are at home and have access to essentially a slot machine built into a game, and potentially their parents' credit cards that could rack up huge bills. And it's rightful to say it's wrong that if an E for everyone game is available and children are playing it and it has slot machines, it's like it should be treated just like a casino, where it's in the US, it's 18 plus to go into most casinos. So games should be seeing the same sort of regulation.
Yeah, I'm fine with loot boxes and the idea of technically Diablo and basically all games with drops are effectively loot boxes. Every single character is a loot box. You're not paying money for them, but you're paying time, and it's part of the game loop itself. The problem is when you're paying real money to get at that stuff. And you're not guaranteed. Like, if I pay $20 for a loot box versus $3 for a loot box, I'm not guaranteed to have 100%. What was it? It's like 4.5 times better item or whatever it is I get out of the loot box, because that's part of the randomness. There's just a better chance of it. They might make certain tiers of guarantee. I think Nintendo had to do something like that with some of their loot box equivalents on iOS. There was some, I think, Japan or China or some country regulated that. It said, no, this is not. You guys need to improve this, because the total randomness is not cool. There was something about that, but
yeah. I'm sort of behind it. The real question is if like say one country like Germany outlaws them and says you cannot put these in video games. Like what are the workarounds that these game companies are going to do, or will like I think it's unlikely, but will EA just say okay then we're not going to be selling within Germany? But
Yeah,
Germany, well, the like pan Western Europe, Germany, France, Spain, England, Italy,
yeah,
basically that zone is a lot of business for them. It's I think it's slightly larger than the U.S. population wise, if you combine all of them.
right.
And so they're not going to like kick out that market. But I imagine that they start getting either craftier or sidestepping in funny ways, which is going to require more legislation. And I think once there's a taste for the legislation, they'll continue to pursue it until some of the more nefarious methods of sucking money out of a game are going to be squashed.
Yep.
Cool. Last topic, Eric. This is the one that you wanted to talk about. So I'll let you
just because
carry it
it happened, as far as I know, it happened today. But Roblox went IPO. I had heard about the game a long time ago. Apparently, it's been out since 2006.
Yeah, it's been on like a long, steady development cycle.
Yep. And in most recently, I heard about it through friends of mine with kids, and they talk about their kids programming. I was in a Slack community earlier today, and people were talking about how their kids, they build themselves as being everyone can make a game, no programming required platform. But the response from programmers in that Discord, game programmers, that's a lie. It's still it may be visual programming to an extent, but it's still some sort of programming, and it's apparently also not at all clear or easy. But when you're a kid and you're highly motivated, you'll work through it and make it. And apparently that's what they've like kids these days, ages 6 and up, let's say 6 to 12 or something, especially during the pandemic, have been eating it up. And apparently that's been enough to get the IPO today shot up to an instant valuation of $45 billion. That's one company on one game, which technically you can call it a platform. But it's echoes a little bit of Mojang's sale to Microsoft back in the day with Minecraft.
Yeah, I mean, player base wise, I think it's similar. Basically, the opening bid was $45 per share, and I think it shot up to 64, if not higher than that. I was paying attention to it earlier in the day, but I mean, we'll see. We'll see if it settles down or if it continues to trend upwards. Like Eric said, there's a ton of children playing it. All my nieces play it, and they think it's great. And I watch them play it. I'm like, this looks terrible, but
yeah.
And there's definitely adults making games on it. Like, as much as they like to say, it's like, oh yeah, it's for children. I'm like, nope, those are adults capitalizing on it, because basically there's Robux, that is like the virtual currency, but it's paid for in real money, and that purchases games and levels and texture packs and et cetera, but it's all, or I think most of it is UGC. It's right. It's someone's generating. It's not necessarily Roblox. They're just skimming off whatever it is, the percentage that they're going to take off the top. So basically, if you're looking for a new business idea, build Roblox levels as a professional game designer and make things that kids would like to play, because you'll probably just get tons of money. And actually, in the whole thing with loot boxes, some of the games that I've seen just implement that sort of thing in there. It's like, oh, pay Roblox to buy an egg, and the egg will randomly generate your pet that you get to ride on. And it's like, oh, okay, so it's definitely adults building these things and monetizing just like any other game. So it's like a virtual, it's like Little Big Planet kind of in that sense.
Except that you can actually make real money on the stuff that you make instead of just put it out for the community.
Yeah. Get those gullible
Yeah,
children to give you a shovel off their parents' money. It's a great business. It's second to like making businesses that prey on like septuagenarians and selling
yeah.
them awful pillows or something. Um,
I did just look. Minecraft, or not Minecraft, Mojang and the Minecraft IP were bought by Microsoft for $2.5 billion.
yeah, no, this is
Um,
a lot higher.
well, it's
Valuation
also a
currently.
little bit different because it's not a wholesale buyout, right? It's just how
Public
much the
buyout.
public market is willing to value it in that. Yeah,
Yeah,
we'll
but
see
I
where they
mean,
settle.
even still, like if they went up from 60 to 65 from 45, and the final valuation for the end of the day was 42 billion, then that means that, they were like 20, 30 billion
To start.
initial offering, and something in their business seems to indicate that they can generate that amount of money. I don't know how that's true, but
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't looked into any of the numbers
no,
or
I mean, it just
their.
means that there's a lot of children playing it, a lot of children making micro purchases, or at least the promise that, if they have whatever it is, 50 million children playing it, that and each of them are purchasing at rates of, whatever, $3 per month, that, it might be able to justify it, and that the IPO is going to justify a larger expansion into more markets or more ways to take money from kids. Uh,
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they do post pandemic. Yeah.
Cool. Well, that covers the news for today. If you're joining us now, we're Sonic Bloom. I'm Justin, and that's Eric, and
Oh,
we're developers that have worked in the industry for a while. And basically, we take this time every week to go over some of the news from like an industry perspective and a games business perspective.
yeah.
We don't have any special advanced knowledge of most things, but we do have insight of being in the industry for 10 plus years, and just watching the trends. But we love audio. We have
Game
tools.
audio.
Yeah, we have tools that are there to help game audio, and basically we want to take this time generally every week to sort of talk about game audio, give it more attention, and in the future get more of our the people that we work with on a day-to-day basis that are doing cool things with, in the indie space, game audio, and give them a chance to talk about what they're doing. Really shine that light on it, because graphics aren't everything. They're a
Right.
lot,
Yeah.
but they're not everything.
Graphics are all about shining light already. We don't need to do that
Yeah.
anymore for them.
Let's talk ray trace audio, not ray trace lighting, which is a real thing, everybody, if you're not familiar.
Yeah. Audio refraction and all that other fun stuff.
Yep. Let's talk a bit about game audio before we close it for the day.
Yeah.
Basically, I kind of wanted to talk about like the future now. We've talked already about what we think the future of audio is going to be like, and sort of the tech that we want to see in the future. But let's talk about where we're at currently. Microsoft, or not Microsoft, some degree Microsoft, but
CNE.
Sony more specifically had like a huge part of their whole like PlayStation 5 breakdown.
Initial announcement by Mark Cerny.
Yeah, when they did like the tech breakdown, a lot of it was allocated to the Tempest engine, which is basically a dedicated high performance processor that is there to do a lot of audio transformations, which are typically expensive. So that the fidelity of audio and the things that we're able to do in the sort of DSP space for audio spatialization gets a much needed shot in the arm. Likewise, we had the Unreal 5 engine talk a lot about their spatial audio, specifically the convolution reverb stuff, the sound field rendering, ambisonics. Basically, it's all how you render audio in a space so that it sounds realistic. It's like the most advanced versions of DSP. Not to leave Microsoft out, but they I think have worked very closely with Dolby to get a version of Atmos working. And Atmos has tech that does all these things as well, and will render audio and spatialization strongly. We want to talk about a bit about that. We have a comment from I'm going to botch that. Stylo 88. Do you guys know if there are any games confirmed using Tempest yet? I do. Eric, do you want to talk about this, or are you still kind of unsure?
I'm unsure actually. I'm also curious about this, and my understanding was that the PlayStation 5 would, if you use certain APIs internally, it would use the Tempest engine behind the scenes to kind of automate some of this stuff for you and just give you stuff for free. Um, but if there are games confirmed to be taking direct, yeah, the big thing in the Tempest engine, to my understanding, was that it had support for HRTF, head related transfer functions, which are things where there are certain hardware devices that you can load in a profile of where basically they take a three-dimensional model of your own ears, and everyone has their own unique head related transfer function, HRTF. And when you pass the music or the sound through the HRTF, you can then do better jobs with like 3D positioning and whatnot. So that's kind of one of the major benefits of what Tempest Engine handles behind the scenes and offline. It's something that games do not have to do. The CPU won't have to do it. There's no extra overhead for this. It's for free. And they have apparently the PlayStation 5 is or will be preloaded with several HRTFs that are seen to be, they're, according to Sony's tests, are fairly average. Like there are many people that they work for. So that's kind of a little bit of the background of the hardware and what that tech does and is. Justin, you said that you're aware of games that are making explicit use of it.
Yeah, well, Astro's Playroom does.
Right.
Although it's if I think if you take a listen to it, it's kind of hard to hear how much the difference is, or how much difference there is.
Yeah.
But just to add to this a bit, like the Tempest engine, besides its marketing, isn't particularly interesting. It basically is like a set of high performance cores that are really good at doing linear calculations, which is great for doing audio transformations without loading it on the processor. There's a bunch of spatialization stuff that doesn't even have to do with HRTF that I think you can use the Tempest engine for. You can go, hey, here's this high performance processor, and we're going to be doing interesting audio transformations that we can offload onto this piece of hardware and let it do the work. Then there's the addition of the HRTFs, which, as Eric explained, that is also processed on the Tempest engine and helps for better spatialization based off of ear shape, basically, which does an awful lot to sell spatialization in ways that I think most people can't quite appreciate. But the bottom line is, it's being used. My guess is that it's not being used to full advantage, as are many Sony or like the next generation attributes are. Like ray trace lighting still being figured out. What you can do with audio is still being figured out. So I think this is the sort of thing that you're going to find take a while to be used in exceptional ways in games. But at the very least, it looks like Sony's first party games are taking advantage of the Tempest engine. It's just that they may not be doing anything particularly spectacular with spatialization or things that require sound transformations to be done efficiently. But I think this is the sort of thing that someone is going to do something very crazy and interesting with that extra processing power in the future. That's going to open up the eyes of a lot of developers and being like, oh, we should do that too.
There may be a thing where, ambisonics is a good way to do 3D spatialization for audio. It's like a recording format and a type that captures position of the source and allows you to recreate that in playback. And Wise, the audio engine Wise has had support for that for a number of years now. It's very likely that I don't know for sure. I haven't looked into it, but I guess that they're already working with Sony on getting that working in the Tempest engine or on top of it. for when targeting the PlayStation 5. What that might mean is game developers will have the ability to just get extra headroom when using that feature for their audio on the PlayStation 5 versus platforms that don't have hardware acceleration for it. Or it means that they just turn off some of the 3D features on other consoles and say, like, we want the overhead for other things. We'll turn it on this platform and not on this other one. So there's interesting things that we'll see there, and I think Sony will be, once they can kind of get the their HRTF layer properly figured out, the stuff they've promised, that will then allow them to focus on providing more games that focus directly on that. It's still super early. It almost feels like this generation has been get the hardware into the hands of the players at the same time as they get it into the hands of the developers. It could also be that games are so complex these days that to truly take advantage of all those features means that you'd need 2 or 3 years lead time with the hardware to actually, have a library of games that at launch that like really showcase what it's capable of.
Well, I think this is actually kind of speaks to both points that have been talked over at this point. Excuse me. And that's that basically that since the PS2, all the developments in graphics, all the developments in audio are all third-party middleware mostly, but that means that basically these third-party middleware providers that allow developers to build 3D games efficiently and build 3D audio efficiently all have to catch up. And my guess is that although they've probably been thinking about it and they're probably developing for it, it's still probably a couple years out. It's like the UE5 engine that can take full use of this next gen hardware now that like the base level for games has been raised. The UE5 engine is not ready. We're relying on UE4 and stuff that they've added to UE4 to really help developers who are on that to make use of next gen. But Unreal, I think, had, or not Unreal, but Epic had realized that, hey, if we have this new standard for how quickly we can read and write from the hard drive onto memory, and in some cases completely skip writing to memory and write directly to the CPU caches, or essentially getting shortcuts that allow efficiency gains all over the place, means that the what we can do with graphics, what we can do with audio, is going to be drastically different. Epic wasn't ready for that with their infinite budget, and UE5 is, I think, going to be released in 2022, or maybe it's like 2021. And then games on top of that will be having to port over and then make use of that. So basically, we're probably like 3 years out from true like utilization of this hardware, with maybe Sony's internal teams jumping the gun and being able to get ahead of it, and without using because they sort of have their own engines. A lot of them don't use Unreal or third-party engines. They have their own internal engine that has been developed in those. They've probably had hardware for a long time. But I think the real expectation here is that games are making use of the hardware. It's just how they make use of the hardware, I think, has to advance quite a bit before we're really going to be blown away. In the same way that it took like until God of War on the PlayStation for us to go, on the PlayStation 4, for us to go, oh wow, like you can get a lot out of these systems. Because prior to that, we were seeing some, late gen ports from PS3 to PS4 that might have had higher resolutions, but they didn't look that great. And we're seeing the exact same thing right now. Like PS5, Xbox Series X games are essentially upscaled, higher frame rate versions of games that were perfectly capable of running on the past generation of hardware.
Yeah, and it's gotten to the point where, consoles are starting to look more and more PC-like. To the point where we have different hardware profiles. There's the PS4, the PS4 Pro, you have the Xbox One, the Xbox One S, the Xbox One X, then you have the Xbox Series X and the Series S. And, and we now have Digital Foundry, the fellows over at
Digital Foundry.
on YouTube, on digital, yeah, fellas over at Digital Foundry, the Digital Foundry guys. That team, they have an entire YouTube channel that is dedicated to like identifying the differences in rendering techniques and optimizations used in the different versions on all the different consoles.
Yeah, so I think I don't know. I think to be able to hear the promise is just still a couple years off. Yeah, it took to like the end of the PlayStation 4 generation to actually hear like some truly impressive 3D audio come out of Sony first party games. We're talking about this Last of Us 2 and like how impressive the 3D audio was in that with just a pair of headphones, because most games that have some sort of 3D audio do an awful job at translating it to two speakers and not like having the like voices from behind you being totally lost. Or if you turn away, like if you turn the attention away from like someone who's talking to you, like sometimes it just like disappears. You have like almost like blind spots, but they're audio blind spots. So like if you're turned in the wrong direction, the audio just drops entirely. And that stuff is pretty lousy. It's just like bad.
Yeah, it's a very basic way to do stereo.
Yeah,
the volume if they're not facing the ear cones, right?
Yeah.
So
go ahead.
I think a lot of that has to do with is similar to graphics, right? If we take the very visual and easy to understand graphics stuff, throughout the course of the generation of the game, it's not just learning to use the hardware better; it's also coming up with new math, new algorithms to solve new problems, and represent data in a new way. Media Molecule did that with Dreams, where they took an entirely different approach to rendering to make that game, and a lot of that gets presentations at SIGGRAPH conferences. And it's fun. You can kind of go back and find old talks where you're like, how would I do this? And you do a Google search and you find, someone at Ubisoft presented this at, SIGGRAPH 2013. Cool. There's the algorithm right there.
I mean, a good example of this actually is even that AMD has been talking about DLSS or their version of DLSS, which is a way of upsampling an image using AI to reconstruct it in a better way. Nvidia has it, and I'm blanking on the Nvidia term that they use for their version.
It's DLSS.
Okay, so it's DLSS.
Yeah, Nvidia stuff.
And they have 2.0 out, and in a lot of cases, with like a 20% overhead budget given back to the game, you can render 4K images at higher clarity than having a native rendering, with the exception of some weird edge cases where it's like if you just change a scene and the image is new, you're not going to have the upsampling or upscaling working that well, but within like a couple frames it's there again. So weird transition issues, but basically if that's applied across the board, AMD applies it across the board, it's a free 20% overhead given to any game that can now be used to rendering more realistic graphics, physics, dynamics, all these other things that like we still don't see that often in games, now made available because AI systems can help upscale an image more effectively than brute process, and you get free overhead as a result of it.
Yeah, there's
and these things take time, I guess is what the point is. Like it takes some time before we see it, but once it's in, we're going to start seeing the benefits of it.
Yeah, so with new hardware comes new capabilities and new search for algorithms, and that's where the whole like continuation of the steady march of improvements throughout the console generation happens. It's interesting. It'll be interesting to see what comes of all the stuff this time. I would say that the late gen PS4 and Xbox One series games benefited from the inclusion of ambisonics. Were not readily available or possibly at all available at the launch of those consoles, but audio engines made them feasible, and they were definitely around for late gen. So it's that kind of thing. This gen, theoretically, Sony has taken some of those and said, these are good. Let's put those into the hardware. and you know, with luck, we'll see improvements.
Yeah. So hang tight for another like year or so before we start seeing some really impressive things with 3D audio.
Unique things with 3D audio, at least on the PlayStation side of things. I wouldn't be surprised if Sony did some other example thing where they have a set piece again.
Yeah, again, internal studios should be on it faster than, you know, Epic, but yeah. Well, I think that wraps it up for today. Does anybody have any questions that's still hanging out and listening to us while they're on for a while? Anybody?
Yeah, give that little broadcast lag.
Yeah, I'll give it like that. Yeah, like half a second.
We gotta get little like sound cards, like little video and the sounds that say like, you know, give us a time, 30 seconds or whatever.
Right.
With some jingle.
Well, we got a thanks. So I think that answers our question.
All right.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us. Again, we'll be doing this same time next week, covering news and ideally some game audio stuff.
Chatting game audio stuff.
Cool. Well, we'll see you then. Take care.
Yeah. Have a good weekend, everyone.